Great.
I woke up with this coffee.
Great.
I was very, very tired and I was
It's the magic.
Hi.
I'm Ryan.
Michelle, nice to meet you.
Michelle, how are you?
Are you translating? Somebody
You
is
have me.
translating. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You don't know. what you're doing.
No, I'm in the Department of Spanish.
Oh, okay.
I'll introduce him, but I don't.
No, the reason why I asked is because one verb, you know.
Yeah.
My
That's what
colleague
downloaded it, so you can just check that it's the right one.
offered to translate,
Okay.
but once said there was somebody coming with him who translated, it doesn't look like. All right, so
Yeah, I
we
haven't
need to
heard about
maybe revisit. that.
You need to do the big one.
I'm gonna
So I think
go.
he's trying to get.
Oh, it's both. Oh,
I think you know, actually.
okay,
It's in English, right? Yeah.
Oh, okay, so you don't need translation, you don't want, okay, all right,
I think we're good.
okay, good. We're there for a
Yeah,
second.
no worries.
Okay.
you wanna check the slides, just make sure everything's all cool. Okay, not that happens, but, yeah. I am teaching design studio and a master's thesis. We meet once a week and they all have faculty chairs. And in the past, it's been very unclear what the coordinator versus the chair, you know, there's a lot of, like, well, I got conflicting information. So this year, or when I sort of I made it pretty clear what my job was. It was like in-class activities and group work and other stuff at school, not individual. So and it's really fun. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna send you.
Okay, great.
Because I had told this great.
Oh, okay.
Okay, yep. It's just outside the door. The lavalier, and then it's the only way to change slides. Hello.
I'm Ryan, I'm in the Spanish department.
Oh, this is your name.
Nice to meet you.
What?
I thought we were in the break space, so I sent that message to our students, so I'm gonna make an announcement now.
Yeah, that's perfect. And like, not that big, I think.
Yeah.
Is that possible to do this? Oh. Okay. We do it. No. I was just gonna want to do it, but that's all great. Oh,
Maybe we should just, I'll look over with you and later.
Okay.
Good to see you.
A lot going on today, huh?
Yeah, that's fine. Oh, no. Because it transcripts here, and then as the speaker's talking, it's like looking at it, or he or she is.
This is
What?
Got one of those.
Sketch for this present.
Make sure the sound.
Sure. Okay.
It's not rocket science and it should. That's the same time.
It's just like one more thing.
Right, exactly.
They're all
One more thing when everyone's like.
already are.
Thanks, James. Everyone's gonna come over for the design. That dash.
Excellent. That's good.
He's not here. So we couldn't even send it. I don't know much about your school and your department. How many departments are inside the school?
I think another 12.
Oh, a lot.
Yeah, so film, Russian. Register. Yeah, there's a lot. It's pretty big.
That's cool.
Yeah, it works out okay. Doctoral, master,
Mhm.
and then there is two other.
Yeah, we actually don't have. There's,
They're in A.
yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But we have planning, preservation, and architecture is the only one that's under.
Oh,
Yeah. it's the other. And we'll turn this on. Yes.
Okay, this is a testing, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Gary, Gary, can you hear?
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Right.
Did people have chairs out and stuff on the auditorium? Or were they just- Okay. No, they're just like. It's okay. Yeah, you do. Yeah.
Just curious.
Gather the stragglers. We'll start in a few minutes. We can stay on time and then the students' video will continue to trickle in. Hey, everybody, welcome to the next lecture in our lecture series. We are very excited to have Enrique de Anda with us today. For everyone on Zoom, this is a friendly reminder that this is being recorded, so if you don't want to be on camera, please turn off your video camera. As we have done in the past, we'll start with a brief land acknowledgement for the lecture. The University of Maryland is built on land that was stolen from the Piscataway people by European colonists. Subsequently, the land upon which the campus is located is likely to have been worked by some of the over 300 enslaved African people who were the property of Charles Benedict Calvert, founder of Maryland Agricultural College, the predecessor to the present-day University of Maryland. So we pay respects to the Piscataway people and the enslaved African people whose lives were tied to these lands. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, immigration, and settlement that bring us together here today. We are here in our lecture series, April 1st. Next week, we're very excited to host Adam Bresnick, the key professor. We'll be in here and also on Zoom. It'll be a hybrid format next Friday. And with that, I will pass it on for the introduction of Enrique de Anda. So thanks for co-hosting.
Just gonna take this off really quick. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Long. I'm an associate professor of Spanish here at the University of Maryland. It is an honor and a pleasure to introduce Dr. Enrique Javier de Anda Alanis, and I thank you very much for being here. Many people and institutions have made this event possible. The School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation has provided generous financial support and indispensable logistical assistance. I would like to thank personally Professors Lindsay May and Juan Luis Burke, and the director of the architecture program, Professor Brian Kelly. Ixnic Iroegas Peon, the director of the Mexican Cultural Institute, and Professor M.A.s were also instrumental in making Dr. de Anda's visit happen, as was Neri Gonzalez, doctoral student in Spanish, who has helped with publicity and meals. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Enrique de Anda is an architect and a cultural historian in the Institute of Aesthetic Investigations at Mexico's National Autonomous University, or UNAM. His publications include more than a dozen single-authored books and many, many more co-edited volumes, book chapters, and articles. His work covers a tremendous range of topics related to the history of culture and architecture in Mexico. Only since 2014, for example, he has published a book about Luis Barragan, a new edition of his History of Mexican Architecture, and 2 additional books about the Mexican Institute of Social Security, including Theaters and Hospitals, the Social Security buildings during the presidency of Adolfo López Mateos, a study that combines Dr. de Anda's research into architecture, culture, education, politics, and social policy. In addition to his major accomplishments as a scholar, Dr. de Anda is also a professor in the departments of architecture and literature at the UNAM. His teaching draws from and strengthens his research and his collaborative work, which is also extraordinary. It has resulted in, for example, the foundation in 2006 and the directorship still today of the Archive of Mexican Architecture and Visual Culture of the 20th Century, and the publication completed with his students titled Social Architecture in Mexico, Cuba, and Peru during the Cold War, A New Culture of Architecture, 1955 to 1970. During his academic training, he won prizes for the best master's and doctoral theses, respectively, at the National Institute of Anthropology and History and at the UNAM. He has also been awarded the Silver Medal of the Federation of Architecture Colleges for.
Trying that iPhone, I'm just making that and
Oh, yeah, sure.
waiting for people. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
I just wanted to make people and I think we should be fine.
Okay, great.
Sorry, didn't.
That's okay. No, it's fine. Let's see. He has also been awarded the Silver Medal of the Federation of Architecture Colleges for his book about theaters and hospitals, and the Prize of Merit in the Arts from the Congress of Mexico City. Dr. de Anda's writing, both lucid and complex, combines his profound knowledge of several topics with a carefully considered methodology that considers together visual history, fiction, autobiography, and the significance of built space to cultural development and debate. I had the pleasure of meeting Enrique when I sent him an email about his archive back in the summer of 2021, which, as we all know, seems like a long time ago already. Since then, I have benefited a great deal from his wisdom and generosity. We have stayed in touch via email and Zoom, and this week I have finally had the chance to meet him in person and to share meals with students and colleagues, and even a delightful trip to Silver Springs Tasty Diner, which, if you haven't been there, I highly recommend. A trip complete with coffee and pie. It is a real pleasure to be able to help you host him here in Maryland and DC. Today, Enrique will be presenting a lecture titled A Debate with History, Mexican Architecture, 1928-1964. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Enrique Javier de Anda Alanis.
It is a pleasure to be with you this evening. Thank you very much. To the authorities, to the university, to my friends, and so on. Mexican architects produce a lot of good buildings along the first half of the 20th century under the influence of the European modern movement. As it was happening in other countries, the way in which the history of architecture was being written gave it a mythical form, meaning only a few architects and some buildings were placed in the first stage. Architects were considered geniuses and the buildings art creations. There was no analysis beyond the description of the plastic forms, and the authors were thought of gifted with attributes that no one could explain why they had them. We must assume in the first place that we didn't have in Mexico a strong discipline of history of modern architecture. Even though for the pre-Hispanic period, there are important studies carried out by Salvador Toscano and Ignacio Marquina. Also, for the Viceroyalty period, 1521 to 1810, there are important historians such as Manuel Toussaint and Francisco de la Maza, among others. In the 20th century period, were the books of Easterborn and Israel Katzman, the ones that began shaping the new modern history studies. The two aims that I have for this paper this evening are, first, to propose architectural cultural history as a method for building a new profile of history. And second, to present my personal hypothesis that Mexican architecture of the first half of the 20th century was constituted by two main conditions: by the international modern movement plastic vocabulary and the local tradition of the pre-Hispanic architecture, and in a lesser degree, the Baroque ornamental spaces and facades with the vocabulary of the Viceroyalty period, 17th and 18th centuries. Regarding the cultural history of architecture method, it is related with my proposal to consider as a part of the whole cultural landscape, and in such a way we can handle a tool repertoire apart from its artistic nature. This repertoire is formed by the politics, economy, and the religious, just in some particular periods, the symbols and their social significance, as well as technology and aesthetics. I will present 10 buildings pointing out their morphological and spatial characteristics under the modern movement influence, and in some cases using pre-Hispanic memories and Viceroyalty ornamental motifs. Before that, I would like to present the next 4 subjects that will work as a screen in front of which the architecture occurred. The first one is the Mexican Revolution and its artistic and cultural consequences that were shaped by the ideas, work, and projects of intellectuals and artists that were public employees, for example, José Vasconcelos, as well as non-governmental officials, such as architect Juan O Gorman and Antonieta Rivas Mercado. He was a cultural promoter. And Diego Rivera, one of the muralists. In a few words, the challenge was to let awake another modernism, a mix of popular vindication between the European avant-garde and the nationalistic thought of José Vasconcelos, among others. Second, there was a sort of tension between the revolution transformed in modernism and the stronger recent legacy born in the Fine Arts Academy. That legacy was historicism that arrived from Europe. The projects under the historicist thought were supposed to be a mixture of historic styles that were in relation with the character that was given to each kind of building. For example, the Greek style was for official and financial buildings, the Egyptian one for funerary, and so on. Actually, These conditions are voiced the first examples of the new Baroque architecture, more or less in Mexico in 1917. Third, the shape of the pre-Hispanic architecture as an image that had been alive along the centuries and that materialized in architecture. It was something abstract that became volume far away from imitations. And the fourth is regarding the European modern movement and its influence all over the world. In Mexico, it arrived in the last years of the 1920s, and it began to be a part of the new architecture of youngs Juan O Gorman and Juan Legarreta. If it is possible to mention a golden age of this track of architecture, must be located in 1940s, when the professional development of the young generation of architects occurred as they got better ground opportunities with governmental clients as well as private investors. Moreover, and aside of the quality of their designs and the number of buildings, this type of architecture not only caught the attention of the critics, but also allowed the birth of the modern architecture in Mexico. But I want to demonstrate that this was not the only drive that made possible a new image for the Mexican architecture according to the modern European times. My aim for this lecture will be to show you that there is another strong force, the pre-Hispanic memories turned out into architectonic volumes. I gave to this paper the headline of a debate with history, because my argument is that the Mexican designers most of the times had a particular idea regarding history. During the period that concerns us, there were three fields of the Mexican past on the mind of some architects. First, the Mesoamerican forms, the pre-Hispanic forms were present, the ones of the ancient cultures, of which Aztec architecture is one of its best paradigms. Second is the oneself or the inner history, a path followed by Luis Barragan. His work was a reflection of his own history. Therefore, he was not only a follower of a foreign style. And in third place, it is the widespread definition of Johnson and Hitchcock, that of internationalism as a synonym of modern movement. In this concept of history, architecture is non-historical because it constructs the future departing from the present as a tabula rasa. In order to explain the aforementioned, I have chosen 10 projects. The oldest dates from 1932 and the last one from 1976. I will mention for each example how the idea and a debate with history occurred, and also the cultural subjects underlying each project. The first case has to do with the inside history, the personal history that only occurs in the life of the architect. This is the case of Luis Barragan. He was born in 1901 in Guadalajara, where he studied engineering. Guadalajara was far from having the intellectual and artistic atmosphere of the capital of the country and also of the Mexican Revolution. The Mexican Revolution cultural circumstance that occurred in Mexico City. Barragan was able to develop his own theory separated from the School of Architecture in Mexico and the nationalistic doctrine. Since his first works in 1927, he wanted to reconstruct the memories of his young life spent in small villages, not in the big city. When he built in 1945 his first house in Tacubaya, Mexico City, his challenge was to think in a structure of walls in which it was possible to be in touch with the memories of his time in the old haciendas, towards the creation of an atmosphere prone to be in touch with oneself. The other matter was the garden. The first stage of the house was finished in 1945, when in Mexico, gardens were not important factors. Barragán began to give them the highest attention. Our second case of study is the house and atelier of the painter Diego Rivera, built in 1932 by Juan O Gorman at the age of 30. O Gorman was Diego Rivera's follower since Rivera came back to Mexico after 10 years of living in Paris, close to the international avant-gardes. It is indubitable the geometric, spatial, and symbolic relation with the M.A.s and Ph.D.s house by Le Corbusier, built in 1922 in Paris. O Gorman had to know the house in photographs, as well as Le Corbusier theory of the new architecture, written in his 1923 book, Toward a New Architecture. O Gorman was a rebel student in the School of Architecture when it was inside the Fine Arts Academy. In 1933, he broke relations with his professors because he assumed that they were still living in the past, making the architectonic projects under the idea of historic styles. The most important point against the traditionally decorated historic styles was that architecture should serve the poor, because the revolution was emerged in 1910 to enable social justice. Therefore, the only way to make architecture for the poor was building it without ornaments, with cubic shapes and following the European rationalism that were the avant-garde qualities. My hypothesis of the beginning of the influence of Le Corbusier in America lays on O Gorman's drawing table. As you can see, there are several similarities between the two houses for painters. The roof with the profiles of a factory, the helicoidal external stairs, the working space with plenty of natural light, and the volume as a cube with squared holes. Like in other cases, Rivera's house has some singular and exclusive things. One of them is the natural cactus fence in the border of the lot. O Gorman took this image of the rural fences from the popular and vernacular houses of Oaxaca in southeast Mexico. The third project is without any doubt a classic of the modern Mexican architecture. It is a housing neighborhood designed by Mario Pani and his atelier in 1946, named CUPA. CUPA is the acronym of a large name. It is located in the south of Mexico City, and 71 years after its construction, it is still on foot and with all its original attributes. Mario Pani in the middle of the 1940s, was a mature architect who followed the concepts of the Chart of Athens. He was an ambitious architect who aspired to be a big star of the biggest star of the Mexican architecture. He once said, while Le Corbusier is building 337 apartments in Marseille, I am building facilities for 1,800 apartments. And he did it in the Cupa neighborhood. This project that had the sympathy of President Miguel Alemán somehow followed the Mexican Revolution doctrine because it was serving the workers. The apartments were for the labor union of government employees. Alemán's political project for the country was supported in the private financial inversion, a strong political relationship with the United States, and an ambitious program for the construction of public buildings and other facilities such as highways, airports, touristic, and others. So the facilities of Cupa that hosted in its first days more than 5,400 people were clearly included in the government program. The bill reduced by Le Corbusier was the model used in the design. The buildings were designed running in zigzag form, where the lower plans had a commercial area together with a number of typical apartments of 1 and 2 levels. The university campus of 1954, University campus of the National University, is our fourth modern architectural case. Built since 1950 under the plan project of Teodoro González de León, who designed it when he was a student in the School of Architecture. He mentioned that the general idea was born after Le Corbusier urbanistic theory in the Chart of Athens. González de León designed a layout with enormous green spaces inside the buildings ring surrounding the lot. The development of the master plan was afterward under the responsibility of architects Mario Pani and Enrique del Moral. The school's projects were commissioned to architects selected among the most important in Mexico in that moment. The National University main campus was part of the Mexican Revolution social and cultural project. The academic authorities and the president who studied at this university talked in the project as a link between the Mexican Revolution and the idea of modernism. Undoubtedly, in Del Moral's mind was the pre-Hispanic image of two important ancient cities, Monte Albán and Teotihuacan. In both cases, the architectonic subjects were the black stone images, the large stairs linking the different levels, and the white plazas with volumes in a sort of ring surrounding them. The lot of the campus was full of volcanic stone, so one of the rules for its design was that the stone had to be employed in the architectonic projects. The volcanic stone as a final material appears in pavements, long stairs, facades, and fences. The most important visual argument of the project is still how two strong architectonic traditions can find one way to make a harmonious visual discourse, the geometric volumes of the modern movement and the pre-Hispanic memories in surfaces and materials. One of the buildings of the National University campus is our fifth example. the open-air ball courts by architect Alberto Marique. The ball courts perspective is without a doubt one of the most celebrated architectonic works of the modern Mexican culture. Those buildings are the best example of strong designs, lines lying in the campus, giving place to a superb images full of significance. The pre-Hispanic pyramids appear in front of us like a remembrance of the old times, with the inclined lines doing slopes, plans of black stone. In 1960 was inaugurated the sixth building of our general overview, the Independence neighborhood by the government office in charge of the social security in Mexico. Alejandro Prieto was the main architect of this large complex that followed the same target of the university campus, of working with the main urbanistic argument of the modern movement, as well as the historic symbolism of Mexicanity. In this complex, the local history is a matter of pride and identity, still present as a part of the politic program of the Mexican government of the period 1958 to 1964, along with the Mexican Revolution social doctrine. The general plan followed the chart of Athens, with circulation avenues surrounding the habitable zones. The architects introduced a very young proposal of the heart of the city, concept presented by Joseph Louis Sert at the 8th Siam of Hoddesdon, United Kingdom, in 1951. This was a new notion inside the Mexican Urbanism Convention, introduced in the Independence Neighborhood Plan, manifesting the environment of a small city constituted by 3 areas or small neighborhoods. The main plaza has the character of the most important place of the complex, not only because surrounding it are 2 theaters and the administration facilities, but because its historic symbolism. Miguel Hidalgo, father of the motherland, Quetzalcoatl, the generous king of the Toltec culture, 10th century, and walls engraved with subjects such as the old Mayan city of Palenque. Pre-Hispanic subjects are also present in the facades of the apartment buildings shaped with natural colored stones. During the presidential time of Adolfo López Mateos, 1958 to 1964, the nationalistic heritage of the revolution was taken as the flag under which the large political project had a reason to be. This political period has been pointed out in the modern history of Mexico for having supported a number of cultural programs, theaters, museums, and the start-up of the publication of elementary course books for children between the ages of 7 and 14 years old as a public program. In the presidential speeches, it was clear the message of nationalism, like the government doctrine, arguments that were born with José Vasconcelos in 1922. The architecture for the public buildings was supported by the edification of large housing projects, hospitals, and museums, in which the National Museum of Anthropology was the diamond of the crown. Before talking about this museum, I would like to present the 7th building of our list, that is the Gallery of the Mexican People Forged Toward Its Liberty, commonly known as the Snail. because its indoor space sequence has an helicoid form. Actually, this small building was the nationalistic government highlight project. It was proposed by the poet Jaime Torres Bodet, who was the education minister in the period of President Lopez Mateos. His idea was to create a center for the visitors after the main route of the National History Museum, located at the Chapultepec Castle, which is the core of the Chapultepec Park. It is a gallery because it doesn't house a historic collection. Instead, it has a sequence of small-scale models that represent important events of the historic period that goes from the Independence War in 1810 to the Mexican Revolution in 1910. It is clear that by the time the gallery opened in 1960, the Revolution War was a very important matter for the political argument facing society. Today, in contrast, the image of the Mexican Revolution doesn't appear anymore in the government speech. The idea behind the small models showing this part of the history was because the gallery was addressed to the children. Pedro Ramirez Vázquez was the author of the History Gallery, in which he imposed new symbols to the architecture. The core of the gallery is a space in the last part of the sequence, and it is a homage to the history of Mexico without words, just materials and forms. It is the artificial inner part of a volcano buried in the core of the hill, in which in 1847 an important battle took place, that of the young students of the military school against a foreign enemy. The internal facade is made of red tezontle, a volcanic stone, red stone, commonly used in Mexico in architecture of the 18th century for external facades. President Lopez Mateos was impressed by the space when he inaugurated it, and he said, "This is a like chapel." From the experience of this small construction full of symbols, Ramirez Vázquez was commissioned for the highlight project of the period, the National Anthropology Museum, which is our 8th building. Behind this project were the same three protagonists that played the main role in the history gallery: Adolfo López Mateos, Jaime Torres Bodet, and Pedro Ramirez Vázquez, a 40-year-old mature architect with a large influence inside the architect circle. The concepts regarding the Mexican Revolution are the same used for the Independencia neighborhood and the history gallery. But the importance of this building lay in the way of showing the pre-Hispanic pieces of stone and clay according to their condition as art pieces, and not only as anthropologic testimonies of that which they may represent. Thinking about the architectonic position of the project, it could be located in the frontier line between the modern architecture in Mexico and the ending landscape of the orthodox and geometrical way of the modern movement. It took decorativism to a new path, in which it clearly appeared the pre-Hispanic influence and the best conditions of the modern movement doctrine. The subjects of free space inside the basic geometric forms of the general shape. But I would like to explain is the way in which Ramirez Vázquez's team included the pre-Hispanic legacy kept in the social memory. In the layout is the memory of the large patio of the nunnery quadrangle in Uxmal City, Yucatan, a suburb complex built in the 10th century. The 4 rectangular prisms surrounding the large patio of the museum is a clear memory of the old nunnery quadrangle, which is also present in the internal facades ringing the patio. It also stands out the top surface with its movement sensation. The second level of the museum has a double facade. The inner one is all made of glasses, while the external one has an impressive Venetian plinth designed by artist Manuel Felgueres with vertical zigzag lines made of aluminum and inspired in the ancient king and god Quetzalcoatl in the abstraction of a snake. In some places, in some planes, there are engraved figures or selected poems of the pre-Hispanic tradition, together with the ones of the building of the Independencia neighborhood, that are a clear remembrance of the ones in Palenque, an ancient Maya city. Few years later, in 1968, architect Agustín Hernández finished the construction of our 9-story case. The folkloric ballet school, an important Mexican traditional dance ballet. This building is one of the best examples of how the pre-Hispanic images could still be active without making a copy of its originals. The building is a dance school with classrooms, a small theater, and the company headquarters. All the structure is an evocation of the pre-Columbian architecture. From the outside, it appears as a compact volume with slopes in the 2 lateral facades. A native marble recovers all the masses, even though the trapezoidal figure is not actually a pre-Hispanic sign. The main door and a wall in front of it with this trapezoidal form allow the observer's mind to perceive the Mesoamerican or pre-Hispanic forms. Inside it has a central patio as a vestibule that allows the users to arrive to the different areas of the building. The sunlight on the patio goes through a particular Venetian plane filled with glass in different measures, always taking the shape of a rhombus. When one sees this detail, it seems as it was made of obsidian, a volcanic crystal that was used for making weapons, but that was also considered a sacred material in the pre-Hispanic times. By the time this building was conceived, the Mexican Revolution discourse was beginning to fade away. We can express that its highest point was in the former presidential period of Adolfo López Mateos, even though this whole idea came from the 1920s, looking at the country's past in order to have a new artistic way to express the motherland was strong and alive, at least in some buildings like those we have seen. Years later, architects Agustín Hernández and Manuel González Caterrul gave a brilliant solution to the military school in 1976. This is our 10th and last example. A dramatic solution where the 2 strong forces of modern Mexican architecture crosses to give birth to a gigantic facilities with a modern architecture language. I have arrived to the last part of my lecture, so I want to present my conclusions. First is that the method I have used to explain this architecture is how the history was gotten and understood by the authors. In that matter, I am proposing three particular ways to be in touch with the concept of history. Ancient history, the oneself history, and the nowadays history as a tabula rasa. The examples I have chosen for those three forms let us know that the most of them are the ones linked with the modern movement. But the other two fields show us a kind of examples with a particular identity and singularity that have given to this architecture a sort of brand among the world architecture of the period. Thank you very much. Any questions? A lot of pleasure.
Anyone like to ask a question or start?
Thank you so much. It was really fascinating lecture and so important for us at the School of Architecture. You probably know that Professor Juan Burke, who could not be with us today, teaches a course on Latin American architecture. So this is in the same vein of expanding our repertoire, our knowledge of other modernisms. So the Middle East, North Africa, which is the area that I mainly work on, in the wake of secular revolutions, often had a uncomfortable relationship with the religious past. So when they look back to pre-Islamic forms, sort of ancient forms, they were explicitly saying, we're jumping over the religious heritage and we're going back to our ancient roots as a kind of affirming a secular identity. So I was wondering to what extent something similar happened in Mexico. I don't know enough about Mexican history to know about the attitudes toward the church, the Catholic Church of Mexican revolutionaries. But to what extent did that inform the choice of architects and politicians to go back to a pre-Hispanic past as inspiration for the forms?
Well, there is a very important political condition in 19th century in relation with the Catholic Church, like a strong force. And this was the reform laws by Benito Juárez. When he decided, when the Mexican state decided that the church, Catholic Church, was supposed to be out of the political life of Mexico. The laws take all the properties of the church, not only the money, but the buildings, the haciendas, and so on, and put them under the property of the Mexican state. So in that moment, 1850 more or less, the church began to have a very small presence in the daily life of Mexico. This is very important. Second, in the ideas of the Mexican Revolution, was not present the argument of the church. One of the most important articles of the new constitution of 1917 was they insist in take out the church of the civil life of Mexico. For instance, in 1933, they transformed the article regarding to the official revolution, taking out the Catholic doctrine. There is a very interesting argument or example that maybe let me explain what happened with the church in this moment of the revolution. In the government of Lázaro Cárdenas between 1934 and 1940, and before that, when he was the governor of Michoacán state, which he was born, he decided to transform the churches in libraries. So he take out all the sacred ornaments, and then they put inside books, and instead of the Presbyterian area, in at least one very important example, Juan O Gorman, this young architect, that he was also painter, he was also muralist. He painted a mural in the place which in one moment was the sacred ornament. This mural was the history of Michoacán. So the church was began to be out of the civic life of Mexico. Sure.
I wanted to thank you, Professor Amda. My question was about so I'm based in Madrid, and so Lázaro Cárdenas also allowed many Spanish Republicans from the Civil War to enter Mexico and to form part of Mexican society. And as I understand, there was a whole slew of Spanish architects that escaped from the war and the fascist government, and they were Republicans. And, how do you think that influx of the brain drain from the 1936 Civil War in Spain, how did that impact on the local tradition?
Well, this is a brilliant period of the Mexican culture. The period since 1934, when a lot of Spaniards began to arrive to Mexico, because in Spain was the Civil War, and we received a lot of people in all the levels and grades. A lot of industrials, a lot of artists, few architects, but very important architects. The most, of course, without a doubt, was Felix Candela. If you remember, when I present the campus of the UNAM, there is a small building, it's a Son Lab. This was the first building designed by Felix Candela, designed and built by Felix Candela. Felix Candela, as you know, arrived to Mexico at the last years of the 1930s. Along 10 years, he studied, he nice because he need to work in the days. He studied in the public library the theories of the German people regarding the structures, and when he was prepared, he was able to make his first project in Universidad. This beautiful, this this is a jewel, this building, with all the theory of the new structures by Felix Candela. He was a very important person. He was a leader, and since 1949 to 1968, when he decided to move to Duke in the States, Duke or North Carolina, I don't remember. But this period was a gold period for the structures in Mexico. Beautiful buildings. Most of the times he built them in association with other architects. Sometimes the other architects gave the idea and Candela made the calculations. Some other times he myself make the design, but it was very important. There are other architects, but in relation with Candela, no one like Candela. No one like Candela.
Any other questions?
It's generally a comment of land things about Mexico.
I can hear you.
Mine is a comment. I've learned a couple of things in the presentation about Mexico, the architecture, the history. I think my takeaway is that was very insightful, and well, it encourages someone to do some more digging on the architectural history of Mexico, whether it's the political, social, or economical aspect of it. Thank you.
Thank you for the wonderful lecture. I've learned some things, so it's exciting to see the work presented. You started the talk with positioning the 10 buildings as continuing this idea of the modern movement, but also reinforcing local traditions. This is something that I think Frampton was exploring in the 70s and 80s when he was looking at cultures on the periphery of Europe, like Utsen's work and Aalto's work in Scandinavia, and in putting forward this idea of critical regionalism. And my question is, do you see, I guess there's parallels that you see in this argument, and are there firms since 64, 68 in the last 40 years that are continuing this exploration of modernity and cultural significance and relevance and form and materiality?
Well, what I did was I decided to put my attention in just one part of the century, because it was impossible in 1 hour to say more, because well, I can do that, but it is not the proper way. And the matter is, well, I am working in this hypothesis. I am what I presented to you today is my first ideas about this other possibility, because in the official history, most of the times the critics and also the historians, I am a historian, they have choose some kind of buildings like the most important, and they took out other buildings because maybe most of the times they don't know in which place, where can I put this building in order to the styles. So Jorge Alberto Marique, who was a very important art critic in Mexico, he invented the idea, he talked about the idea of this force between the modernism, like the, not like the modernism of the in the modern movement, and the, not actually the regionalism, but this kind of force that have been present along the time. This kind of force, this is an abstract concept, is the one that I tried to let you know about the pre-Hispanic condition. There was something in the mind of the architects. It is not a natural condition, it is a cultural condition, because since the elementary school in Mexico, we have the image, we still have the images of the pyramids. So, there is a very important pre-Hispanic city close to Mexico City that is Teotihuacan. And all the children along the time, one of the first visits outside the city have been still to Teotihuacan. So this is, Teotihuacan has a very strong building, big buildings, strong buildings made by stone. So this is an image inside of us. And what I try to explain is how this image still been present in some buildings. I know this idea of by Frampton of the that is the way how Frampton tried to explain something that is it's a little bit difficult. So, for instance, Frampton put the works of Barragan in this regionalist, criticism regionalist. But I think that it is not only the regionalism. Like for instance, when I talk about Barragan, when I speak about Barragan, I try to explain his work like an very inside, well, like an inside meditation, or not actually meditation, but what he had in mind. He had in and this is important because happened to be with the idea of the architecture, like not actually like an artist's expression, but something that is completely different, like chemistry or engineering. When the architects are working, there is something of the soul that goes on the table drawing or in the PC computer that came from inside. So that I want to, it's a very dangerous concept, because people that have in mind that only the rationalist could be explained or could be the reason why, when I said there is something abstract, there could be a very important conflict. Siegfried Gideon, this important critics of the art, once when he was in Brazil and he began to see the new buildings by Niemeyer and Lucio Costa, he said, Gideon, that was the important propagandist of the regionalism, he said, there is something abstract in the Brazilian architecture. Gideon said that. So I think that it is possible to mention this kind of, and of course my respect for Mr. Frampton. This is a way to understand. This is a way to explain. I have another way, and I have to make more or stronger concepts and ideas to let the people explain what I am thinking about this.
Any other questions? Thoughts? Okay, well, final, oh, do you have it?
I'm making the Zoom.
Oh. Good point, let's shift the Zoom. Just checking the audio in the chat. Good reminder though. Thank you very much
Thank you.
for being here today. Thanks, everybody. One final round of applause.